Chilly here with Sirius Taurus Moon. This is Venus, our Mars day. Moon is 21 degrees Scorpio and Venus is 24 degrees Capricorn. I said it in one breath. And so Saturn is 26 degrees Pisces, uh, 14 degrees midheaven Sag, 5 degrees Pisces ascendant. Jupiter is 19 degrees in Cancer in the fifth house. Jupiter 19 degrees, still circling the ascendant of the 1800 Netherlands chart. Um, Now, I know I have dedicated quite some time to this point, but this is, I talked about assassination prevention, um, but to be very honest, assassination of one person or of political persona is just one manifestation of my 22 retrograde Mars ruling over Saturn and Pluto, which would make it ruling over Uranus, Neptune, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and nearly my entire chart, um, which means that it's not surprising that when I went to academia, I was exposed a lot to um, information or historical Saturn analysis, Pluto, of world wars or mass death, genocides, and stuff like that. And around my Pluto square, I would tend not only to political assassination prevention, but to the bigger societal questions around that. And so, just like when I address these things in political assassination prevention, and I say, well, here is the structure that creates that, those are the points of interference that I can identify. Again, I think neither of us is a savior. Also, a soldier is not a savior. A politician is not a savior. We don't think of politicians as saviors, or perhaps some people still do. Um, but I can only tend to the structure that is affecting many people in their lives, and pinpoint what do I see as points of interferences. For example, calling for transparency around what is considered classified projects budget of every country or global organization. That would be imperative to address, and with people already doing things like delaying tax payment until the contract, the societal contract violation by their respective counties or countries is going to be addressed when there are crimes against humanity. Okay. Now, I know a lot of people are also in need of okay, welfare and so on and so forth. So while delaying taxation is only relevant for the people that are through the tax bracket, and a lot is being done so that people will not go through that tax bracket without being already traffickers that benefit from not taking that action against the classified projects that basically fund them. And that is under the guise of a job. The people that you hear, well, people don't want to work anymore, very likely are funded by classified projects. Falken, I have not listened to my colleagues in a while now. As you see, I'm tending to certain things. So if that hit a sore spot in anybody, I don't know that because I haven't seen your podcasts. So, okay. So that's um, and in which case then talk about MK often, called to expose classified projects. A lot of your 401ks that could be confiscated at war is hiding there, more so at the Gen Zer that doesn't want you to pay for their job. so um, so that is again a very general statement. um, when it comes to world wars. Okay, there's nothing like a 22, whether anything that's ruled by Mars, anything that's ruled by Mars 22, now that Mars is 22 and in Capricorn, with Saturn ruling over Pluto and Neptune, Saturn ruling over Pluto, Jupiter over Neptune. But the moon in Scorpio is ruled by Mars that in Saturn sign. So it's a kind of similar situation to what I have in my own chart, particularly with Venus is still in Capricorn ruling over Uranus. Um, that is all outer planets involved in a combat situation. Okay? That's what I said. What I said. Okay, normally it's called a world war, um, or a beginning of something that could be a world war. We had that in 1984 around May, so I was just born. I don't know. Um, but those timelines have their onsets. And so we are right now having the Pluto square, Neptune square, and Uranus opposition to the 1983 4-5 generation. Um, okay, we had and it's one of the most challenging onsets. Okay, Pluto in Scorpio moves very quickly, but quick here does not mean not thorough. And it just makes it more overwhelming. So while I don't necessarily say that every time we have such a configuration that the big outer trees are power mounting or compounding to a Mars action, we're gonna have a big world events, but it's also not impossible that we're gonna have big world events financially that are not necessarily going to be seen as outright world war. So we can look at 1984 history, world history, and I can say that these transits right now do have some volatile world context where we have United States just wondering when and how to bomb if it hasn't bombed yet. Israel being in, prepared for being bombed. And when it comes to those issues, to those world war issues, um, so Indira Gandhi's assassination, rise of Mikhail Gorbachev in USSR, Cold War developments, the Soviet Olympic boycott, Bhopal gas leak, the launch of Apple and Macintosh. That we had a combination of Jupiter and Uranus, with Uranus being in Sag. Okay, so we are the Uranus Sag generation. I have it in the 10th house, conjoined the Ketu. Not conjoined, it's not really conjoined, but it's not really not conjoined either. It's a 6-degree orb, or even less, 6-5 degree orb. UK minor strike, minor strike, minor strike, minor strike. Who's the person that predicted the minor strike? The Uranus Sag person. I was born in a year where there was one. I'm gonna go through my Uranus opposition onset when there's gonna be a minor strike again. But this time also around Greenland and Venezuela. It's their 8th house. I don't know for Greenland, but Venezuela. US and China signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration on Hong Kong, year of LA Summer Olympics, boycotted by the Soviet bloc, and continued tension in Lebanon. So, India, Soviet Union, UK, China, US, Lebanon, Nicaragua. US Congress rebuked President Reagan for funding mining of Nicaragua harbors. Congo! And who the one who said Congo, 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 Congo is not whataboutism for several years? The Uranus person that was born when they were having the exact same thing with Nicaragua. Now, I find out about this right now because I was like, 1984, nothing significant was actually happening. I mean, I was born. Bhopal, India, a massive methyl isocyanate leak from probably something radioactive from a Union carbide plant killed thousands and caused long-term harm, as noted in a Wikipedia article. So it was another Chernobyl, but in India. Radioactive. Um, so, economy and labor, UK. National Union of Mine Workers strike. U.S. bell system was broken up on January 1st. I don't know what is the bell. Do they mean like the actual? Because there is also something about church bells, so I don't know what is that. Um, yes, they do mean the bell system. Bell telephone. So this is what's happening in Iran right now. They're changing up the internet. But there was a different type of system. Okay, I did not know why it was that significant a year. Jan 1st. So Apple launches Macintosh. Um, the Olympics boycotted. Do they know it's Christmas? Not gonna refer to Christmas rituals now. Astronaut Bruce McCandless performed the first untethered spacewalk. Um, okay. Jupiter in the sign of feet. Uranus in the sign of feet is spacewalk. And yeah, a lot of people laugh at me that I have a silly walk. Um, Vatican resumed diplomatic relations with the United States. And the Vatican, not the Vatican, the Church declared empathy a sin. This actually happened. I mean, so Brunei gains full independence from British rule. Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak was re-elected, and the first Papa John's opened. So that was 1984, a more important year than I thought it was. And like you can see here, you know, Saturn was in Scorpio. Pluto, I think for most of the year was in Scorpio. Neptune ingressed into Capricorn. Uranus was mid-Sag, and Jupiter was in Capricorn that year. So basically we have Uranus to Jupiter, Jupiter in Capricorn, Saturn in Scorpio, Pluto in Scorpio, and Neptune ruled by Saturn. Now, those lucky or unlucky folks that have Mars in Scorpio are in my situation right now. Okay, in that year. That means that when us now, and I have a lot of divination, 29 degrees Scorpio in the ninth house, so that is a good enough disclaimer to understand that I'm a walking talisman that can predict certain occult related, social engineer related, or even fated things to do with world wars. Now, I know that I've dedicated an episode to this. I see a lot of people talking about the red-pilled people, giving even arguments that, hey, there used to be monks that didn't care about not having sex or having women continuing their bloodline. They were marrying boys and raping infants, okay? It's regardless of... This is a world war. And... I know you don't like to hear that. You know, my Neptune square has been not only it has been going from the billionaires I was listening to get inspiration. The anything psychiatry channeling therapy related, the music I was listening to get away with things, and then my colleagues. Okay, whoop one down, old Epstein. Happy Neptune Square, and alongside with being juxtaposed to the billionaires I have been listening to get inspiration, the people behind the jabs, and so on and so forth. So uh, understanding that also Aries is going through the ruler of my seventh and fourth, um, which is why I'm one of the people to talk about Aries, also related to the cloning project, um, and neither changes in the elite. Um, that are affecting entire humanity. So what happens when a person breaks up with his girlfriend and goes to therapy? He's being fed red pill by even women psychologists. And there is a sign waiting for him to join a fraternity. And he can scan the code. He being recruited. He would probably be dissociated by the time they are done with the first initiation ritual. And good morning, he's red pilled. Very difficult to do that if there would not be psychic attempts on this person as an infant, that he would not remember or know where they're coming from. And the fact that I was thinking about radio today, there was an article. So here is a digression that's gonna prove useful because it's not a digression. There were people that were stealing stolen properties from the people in the Nova. I know that doesn't raise a lot of empathy from the world, but that was a very cruel ritual sacrifice that was at the precipice of making Israelis believe that we must conquer Gaza. So to get the legitimacy to do what was done in Gaza, there was this mass ritual abuse, sacrifice, torture, something that's usually done underground or in under religious institutions or welfare centers, and was done publicly. The people that have been psychically tortured know what happened there because they did this. We felt it psychically, which is very difficult to explain to people that haven't been through that. And I do not wish you to understand what it is. So sometimes it's scientifically better to be accepting something with less degree of a relaxed degree of empiricism than required for the empirical standards as a philosopher of science to accept it as a dogma, because that would mean that the person would have to go through that, and that's inhumane. Um, by the way, those binders is also how they create mass graves. They make it economic to basically depopulate society and turn them into stone, which basically means anonymous graves. Now, there were people that were robbing the cars or whatever was left. It was not. It was a party that they were going to, and people were just robbing. They were looting the place after the rituals. So first of all, I don't know where the bravery is coming from. And secondly, what I was thinking, my first thought was like, what would they get? The place was lasered like Maui, so what would they even get there? And I'm like, oh, how should I say that? Uh, um, a burnt radio. How do we say mefuyach? Radio mefuyach. Doesn't translate well. Basically, a burned radio. And then the next thought about radio was like, yeah, well, a radio tunes to a frequency. So you get a radio, you just tune it to another level of frequencies, and you can. And then I was like, okay, enough Shirley Brain for today. And Neptune hasn't even ingressed to my second house for good. Um, Radiation skill frequency. So, why is it not a digression? First of all, those radio frequencies can be attuned to brain frequencies. When we hear a delta video for concentration, not concentration camp, um, academic jokes about concentration camps for people studying for exams. When we hear a video with, hey, you're gonna need these Holocaust jokes, it's a really tough topic to tackle. Of course, there was gas. So, when we, study for an exam, I know nothing familiar to people that were around COVID, but when we study to an exam and we listen to those alpha, delta, gamma, epsilon brainwaves, and they actually help, is because something is attuning and affecting the waves in our brain. Okay, and that pertains to the electric waves in our brain. It's just, surely, do we have hidden light there? Maybe. I mean, who knows? What is triggering Shirley brain? Oh, the moon is gonna go over my Mars, so it's Shirley brain time. It's so close to my Mars. Um, and this is where, when we think about attunement to our nervous system brainwaves, if we can record a radio broadcast, what makes you think we can't? And of course, those type of informations are being used. Like, I thought that there is limit to the stupidity of, you know, recording the entire Earth, and I'm like, okay, why would anybody bother to do anything with that? And I've underestimated the stupidity of mankind. It can be womankind because some of them are going through forced sex changes. So a lot of the men we think are just incels are not really originally men. And that's another point to think about. Um, Now, what would be happening is that the onset of the so-called incels is such that they would be broken down, isolated from, and then taken to basically brainwashing at every juncture. This is done on purpose so that when it is World War o'clock, which in case you haven't noticed, it kinda is, they will not be able to say, I'm a young father. Or if they will stay, their wife would be so frustrated with their abuse that with the onset of doing something we were previously helpless about, anything going through Aries, including Neptune, okay, um, then the women would poison the men, protect themselves, or even the children. Jonathan Halo, Jonathan Halo, Jonathan Halo, Jonathan Halo was an Ethiopian child that was molested by his father and murdered his father. Those are considered glitches in the matrix, but the entire matrix is about to glitch. That's the meaning of Saturn Neptune. While they try to reinstall another. So they think they are going to control the glitch. And to be fairly honest, with Neptune still in harmonious aspect to Pluto and Saturn sextiling Pluto, there may be some sort of a thing, but they would have to approach relaxed arousal state, and they would have to mimic relaxed arousal state, which they try to do, but that would inevitably lead to the transformation of what was undermining them, and they won't be able to stay in extortion cults anymore. They would want more, the people would want more for themselves, more sovereignty, than to believe that to have an actual orgasm, not a violence based addiction, is being soft loser. Okay, they're like, hey, there's something more here that I'd like to explore for me as a person, and that lies at the threshold of using a vulnerability as bait. A lot of them would involuntarily, Neptune, go through the threshold of eroticism, Neptune, where they were programmed to switch pleasure with pain. And they could basically, by trying to mimic relaxed arousal, which would be necessary to control the frequency on the onset of the year of Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries, where they would want to manifest something with that energy. And like I said, this onset has already begun. They already manifested certain timelines, but they are broken at the precipice of Aries because it's a Mars sign. So it's broken manifestation, yeah, Neptune. Unless, and with Saturn, it's only broken if from the foundation it was not supportive of one's own sovereignty, which is also the sovereignty of others. That's the logos of Aries. Now, are all people gonna go through that? No. Maybe yes, like I don't know. It's Neptune, okay? But that has such a surprising onset because it is about maintaining that relaxed arousal and maintaining that. And let me tell you a nervous system story. When I was in academia, I was prescribed amphetamines following the parallel of defense. And that was to basically continue my academic work. I was ADHD all the time, but that time I actually needed that. And I used amphetamines. I don't necessarily recommend that because it interferes with absorption of magnesium. And of course, I don't mean it in a cocaine form. Yes? It does get you high enough to deal with challenges around communication and important conversations and so on. And um, for people that haven't experienced happiness or joy in their life, it can create an approximation. And then I noticed that I'm able to process things also regarding trauma, which is how I use that. This is the difference with the people using amphetamines to escape something and using amphetamines to tackle something. Um, and this is a part of why I was not finding it as difficult to switch amphetamines to essential oils once I became aromatherapist. And I told the story of how I was having the first exams for the first course of aromatherapy, and I was wondering whether to take my Concerta amphetamines or not. And I think I actually did take Concerta. I did not feel confident to go to that exam without Concerta. Okay, so that's something. That's an authentic story I tell about my experience with amphetamines. Now, what happened to me that I basically took it to continue my essays, and by the way, it does harm sleep, harms magnesium absorption. Like, get off that pill as soon as you can. But that's supposed to be true to any pill. But this is basically um, something that I took to continue with my studies. and began to have a side effect of crossing certain thresholds where I was able to, by myself, process certain traumas that I dealt with in spite of the systems that were based there for us not to heal. I do predict something like that threshold is going to happen with the Saturn Neptune. Um, Pluto was opposing my moon at the time. Maybe Saturn was going over my midheaven or Uranus. Like, I don't know. It could be that Saturn was going over my Uranus when I took these amphetamines. When did we last have our Saturn Uranus? No, Saturn Uranus conjunction we had. Yeah, Saturn was probably going over my Uranus or Neptune. It could be that Saturn was going over my Neptune. That might be more like it. Saturn was going over my Neptune, and then that was emphasizes my prediction. There's a part of the Saturn Neptune. It's crossing the nervous system threshold. Um, in that case, drug, it was Neptune. But here, relaxed arousal is basically a practice where we try to control Pluto, basically a certain process, Saturn, to do with eroticism, Neptune. And that's basically something that crosses the threshold. And a lot of people are going to reverse by chance, Neptune having to surrender something, have additional side effect that can be both miraculous healing. Um, or cross the threshold where something has side effects that are no longer good and they decide to drop a certain drug even if it is prescribed Saturn. So Neptune drug, Saturn prescribed, and that's basically where a lot of people are going to have the pain pleasure reversal or going from misplaced arousal, which is what was using to program people, to relaxed arousal. A lot of people, to manifest things, had to use the mimicry of relaxed arousal, or people that went through the threshold of or into relaxed arousal, particularly with Uranus and Taurus. A lot of them encounter those people that try to manifest through their energy. Um, but now we're going to have a wave of people that are crossing that threshold involuntarily. So a lot of people are going to have sudden, unexpected, miraculous healing. Um, and if they cross through the threshold of shame that they participated in certain societies, then they can really, really regain their sovereignty here. Okay, I know those are very deep and intricate topics. Um, and because it is the frontier of the frontier of the frontier, it's a prediction of a frontier of science, basically. And it touches to the type of frontiers that people were not allowed to know that in psychiatry, because to know that they would need to participate in MK often as Frank Olsen's. And if they were allowed to know that, they weren't allowed. For example, when I was going through my thesis, I had a conversation with a psychiatrist, and he is really appreciating the way that I'm able to connect the dots, albeit not being a psychiatry professional, but just a body-mind question researcher. Very soon enough afterwards, I saw him going through psychic attack and psychosis. He was called to United States because his brother was accused of murder or something. And basically, it was an onset that now, in retrospective, I think has to do with nervous system hacking weapon. Sorry. I had a friend that she was going to see him for PTSD because he was administering psychedelics. And then he just had to leave, which was, of course, a crisis, and so on and so forth for the people that were his patients. I saw in the crisis where I saw him, he was serving as a link in a trafficking ring that goes through hospitals. And basically, I saw what would be the kidnapping of people that I did not make the dots, but it would be the kidnapping of people that happened in 7th of October. Because I saw these like vans and stuff like that. Um, yeah. Another person that I know is a person who's both astrologer, probably genderqueer, and I misgendered them. And and they used to study from pharmaceutical sciences. So I confronted the fact that there's worked as strippers. I confronted the fact that one cannot have a degree in the United States without funded for it by trafficking if they don't come from certain lineage. And then they stopped talking to me. And I confronted the fact that, hey, these type of performances being in one's body when they are being watched, and the experience around that. And I was just naively, wondering about that because it was like a question that I had around eroticism. Um, but they simply stopped talking to me. It was blessed because there was an intention that to try to social engineer that person would come, let's say, to a vacation in the Dead Sea, would go to the Nova party with me. I don't smoke, I don't drink. They were actually more susceptible, and they're from like they're in United States, so it was kind of a global event that they were planning there. And this is the extortion cults. I don't mean country here, I mean extortion cults. So that property that you seen where I was living at, it was very targeted property. um, I wouldn't be surprised if the people that built there thought that that they could protect themselves by selling or something. I don't know. um, Real estate considerations, I guess. But this is, yeah. So when it comes to the social engineering around incels, it's done so that um, they would be the people fighting the big wars and turning into stone. So this is why I do dedicate the time, because I wouldn't normally address, red pilled people. Um, and I saw that happening because they can break down a person so much. Then I just want to shed light on this topic because this is a part of how they create great wars. And I'm not talking even in the size of a great war here. Um, Quasia Tasio addressed it when she talked about Master Bain Saduno, and when she talked about the child, the Russian child. She was talking with Christina, and she was mentioning that Russian child. Um, yes, he was Christian. It is a very Christian society, but we have to sift the wheat, sort the wheat from the muck, and see that there are actual relevant predictions. So one interesting thing that the child was saying at the end of his predictions about people not peopling and so on and so forth, the end of certain regime in Russia, that I think they cannot even talk about because of the current world situation regimes. Um, and it was, I think he was around six, or it was a very young child, and he said that he has to go early, and he said people are going to be very bad, what people call people not peopling anymore. um, so this thing, in the 90s, when they talk about ritual abuse and they call it satanic panic, today nobody can ignore that. Nobody can ignore that because everybody sees that the phenomena of people not peopling. Light Asefa addressed that as even the division of consciousness going through between people. I also saw all those Silicon Valley videos where they both have cults there. I haven't listened to everything, but they have technology to literally duplicate or clone the consciousness of people and use that in all kinds of weird ways. And I saw a beautiful video about egregores, where they're making an experiment in the 1970s that they built egregore, and egregore is basically what people used to call a tulpa. And I think Light Osefa also talked about horror culture, where if people say that there is a spirit and then eventually there is a spirit, that on a mass scale is creating an egregore. And much like the Frankenstein physical creation that stopped being controllable and began to develop its own sovereignty, that type of egregore was basically requiring sacrifices and keeping people in trauma states in order to feed itself. So this is how relaxed nervous system is so important, and that's why it's being targeted by occult and technological and radiation-based weapon that tackles its inventors as well. So this is where it's really, really way more volatile in the world than we predict it to be. Expect the Pluto, Saturn, Scorpios to tell you that. um, Good points of interference. Knowing that, talking about that is basically raising into awareness. Raising into awareness is higher frequency than secrecy frequency. Raising into awareness, bringing point of interferences. We know that it's about nervous system. We know that it's about love that is actually loving. So we already got frequencies to attune to, or to set intentions to attune to. And we know the core of what is the weapon that is used not just against we the people, but that it's harming its inventors as well. Okay? We know that even the campaigns or the whatever use of technology or whatnot to brainwash people into being, let's say, an incel, um, is basically used to get them turning into anonymous graves at the very great war. Now that we know all that, we understand and it can be more centered and grounded because we understand the core issues of what happens, why that happens, what can we do about that. And this is why I'm dedicating so much time to making these videos. Yet again, Saturn Neptune is going to be around my Neptune square, and it is going to be a year-long transit. We're going to have a lot of miraculous healing as well as a lot of dissolution. These are going to be, if Pluto was core changes, okay, where we had the Jupiter Saturn Pluto conjunction that onsetted COVID. But some of the changes, I had a friend that was a teacher and said, hey, we used to have 40 kids in class, now we have 5. So children were actually getting personal, okay, and then they try to mind control or MK Ultra the kindergarten and school teachers, which set an onset, unfortunately, of suicidal children. But it also caused people to speak up. Um, because before, in my generation, when I was in high school, they would bury people outside the fence if they suspected that they committed suicide. And now there is a look into what undergoverns this so-called decision to kill oneself or even to commit murder. Um, Okay, when Pluto was going over my Uranus, I think it was in high school, and there was the mass shootings in United States, and everybody knew that these children are isolated, that they're going through something that even the parents couldn't. Was it secret societies? I don't know. Was it ritual abuse that the parents didn't know about? I don't know. At age of being teenager, the brain stops obeying parents and starts being affected by society. This is the origin of the power of youth, Jugend movement, youth movements. Okay, when I was in high school, I went to one meeting of one of those youth movements. I don't even remember which, and they tried to normalize the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. No, not by talking about Epstein and extortion cults. By trying to normalize an assassination of a prime minister in a democratic regime where anyway he was about to be de-elected. And I still had people in their 60s saying that Yitzhak Rabin needed to be assassinated because of what he was doing. And I'm like, but there was supposed to be elections. Like anything that he would have been doing that was way too challenging could have been a huge demonstration or calling to have a referendum or literally blockading him from taking that action. For example, demonstration at the airport so they wouldn't travel to sign I don't know what. Okay, those are all actions that could have been facilitated by the very intelligence that probably didn't know about the assassination. National security. I was 12 upon his assassination. It was kind of a big issue, and then then it was the Team for Town, Fort Wayne, and then when I was in COVID, it was Peter, um, who also ran to politics. So yes, I can say that if I try to think about it, when I was 12, Saturn would probably go to my lot of fortune or something. So, yes, of course, to the people to whom this is family is one thing, and then the people that are affected by this, as we the people, um, is different types of traumas. Um, Moving on from that point of political assassinations to world wars, um, creating masses of society that is depriving women of rights and rapey society. Okay, basically people that think that they are entitled to basically be cloned. Those folks need to take a look at cloning project because they that's what they don't plan for these men to have sex and have women have their babies. Even when we talk about rape, they plan to have these people cloned, which means Hans Medema. Okay, I don't condone him calling his wife a whore after he saved her, but he does say some pretty important information about the cloning project. Do you really think that there is a social engineering agenda to continue the bloodlines of incels? Now, if those people are already born into extortion cults, the end game is to have them anonymous graves of the Great War. To people who are not European, I don't have an equivalent for you. Okay? And I know that it's not like United States wasn't involved in the Great War, but both wars it was kind of considered the winner, and Europe wasn't. And when we talk about the Great War in Europe, we talk about those domains upon domains of a stone that stands for I don't know how many millions or not calculable amount of stones with no name. Legacy? That's the legacy. Even as a person that lives in Israel, I do not have an equivalent. We have those anonymous graves, okay? We go to Beersheba, next to Aleph neighborhood, you see those basically units of graves that have no names, also of British people, or they don't even know if they're British, if they're not, like who was buried there. And it could be a Jew next to a British, next to a Muslim, next to what they had to bury them somehow. And there are these anonymous next to the ancient graveyard. That's just a small portion. It's not even something that even people in the Middle East has an equivalent to. For me, as third generation to the freaking Holocaust with Jewish ancestry, okay, going through Europe and seeing that the big memorandums are of the Great War, and the Great War wasn't the Holocaust, it was a defining moment. And that's what they plan to do to the red pilled folks. You know, nobody, like I said, the point is for us to dehumanize one another. You heard me saying, hey, a guy that rapes a woman and think he's entitled to something, nobody will be grieving, will he will be mass graves. But I also know the social engineering that was done to get to its breaking point of being that person. Do I want to see generations of young people get into anonymous graves and all these people worried about their legacies? I have been seeing that for intensively for several months. And the only closest equivalent was those anonymous graves of people that sought legacy, of people that sought lineage, of people that believe they fight for freedom or for the nation or because they couldn't get away with being recruited, of people that were rapists and of people that were defending from rape. Everyone died, okay? Everyone died in the Great War. I'm not talking about the Second World War, and we're not even talking about something the size of the Great War. So, to the people in Europe, like I say, in conversations of Gracia Tassio and Christina, the vibe in Europe, people don't want to get recruited. They're not going to easily go to war. To the people outside of Europe, I am concerned. You folks did not know what was those great war graves in Europe for the people that weren't anymore 2BP5. You know, Israel after the biggest equivalent in Israel after 1967, Israel was considered the winner. And then it was a problem because people didn't want to go to the army anymore. They're like, hey, we exist. And then came the 1973 war. It was kind of like a 7th of October, but then people could still violate illegal order without being techno targeted to stay 12 hours and have everybody asking, where were they 12 hours? I know it is supposed to not draw your empathy and attention. Just like those incels are not supposed to draw my empathy and attention, because I'm supposed to say, well, they're gonna die, let them. That's how they make world wars. Is the moon 22 in? Of course. Oh, okay, I gotta publish this episode. Um, moon sextile Mars, 26, 25. Yes, send it in meet heaven. So you see, and I say that I cannot even say I'm not Mama Teresa because Mama Teresa trafficked children and raped them probably. So y'all heard me saying, hey, these incel rape women, let them be. turn into stone. But the reason that I'm saying that is because I'm one of those charts that very deeply understand what we are heading. I'm not worried for Europe as much as I'm worried for the world. The world that we in the P5 we had China, we had Russia, we had UK, we had France, and we had US. Those are the countries I'm most worried about because they know what it's like to be the winner of both world wars, not to be the masses of anonymous graves of people who sought legacy. And however much we don't like incels, that's the point. We're not supposed to like them. We're not supposed to not want them to die. We're not supposed to try to prevent their death. That's the entire onset from the get-go. Now, I'll say another thing. And whether it's prediction or not, there's nothing on my lot of divination, so it's not a prediction. I'm just saying one possible scenario. As Israeli, I knew to look at Nazi Germany as a study case because I knew, okay, and not everything I can talk about, but I'm gonna tell you as an astrologer, Mars matures at 28. People go to military usually at very young ages. Like many Gen Zers, I was highly suicidal at high school, um, and it was not ideation, and so I was not serving in the army. Of course, like many people in that situation, um, we go around it when we need to be exempt, and everybody understands that that's the situation, and that's how we basically get exempt. Those that didn't maybe shot themselves dead in the army or were killed by so-called friendly fire. And those are the stories you won't hear because I finished the entire Bagrut, which is finishing high school exams. And I was surprised at how I could finish that without answering a single question about the World War, including the Holocaust part in it. I was so, think about it, high school student in Israel, so terrified of when we're going to be examined on the knowledge about the World War. No, think how scary it is for a history class. Am I going to remember the Holocaust correctly? They're probably gonna ask about that. It's one of the most scary things. You know, the world was a shit ton of dates to remember. And I'm a millennial. Like we still had some education in my generation. We were a high tech nation in that time. Um, the J.P. Morgan Chase and the toothpaste. So how should I say that? When it comes to the implications of um, people not really, it's not just people not really knowing what they're doing and why they're doing that, it goes all the way to mind control based military action. I'm not talking about Israel here, I'm talking about global armies. Now, this is something that existed in the past, and basically, one possible scenario, a lot of people say, yeah, the UN declared Israel genocide, genocide, Nazi genocide, and so on and so forth. I said something different. Israel is passing the torch to Palestine as Germany has passed the torch to Israel.